Forever Red is hands down one of the best Power Ranger episodes of all time. It was the first team up of its caliber, and it definitely brought a lot of fans joy. Each Ranger had their respected time on screen.
But that's no fun!
Mostly. One of the reasons this was such a great episode is because it was filmed 100% original to Power Rangers. They didn't have to base the storyline or the fighting off of any Super Sentai footage, so they could adapt everything exactly to what they wanted. But this meant fighting enemies that weren't in Super Sentai, which raises one of the most joked about questions in the Power Ranger fandom, the Beetleborgs.
We finally found it!
But the question lies, how did the Machine Empire acquire the Beetleborg suits? Just saying they just grabbed the costumes from the warehouse and used them is completely 100% true, but there is a really great explanation for why they have them and how they got them. Hi guys, my name is Casey. I love Power Rangers. A very small percentage of you is actually subscribed to this channel, so please go ahead and subscribe so that I can keep making videos for all of you who love them. Big Bad Beetleborgs was a team of 3 heroes. The Beetleborgs consisted of Drew McCormick, the Blue Stinger Beetleborg, his sister Jo McCormick, the Red Striker Beetleborg, and Roland Williams, the Green Hunter Beetleborg. The Green Hunter Beetleborg suit would become Garrick, voiced by Walter Jones in Forever Red. Later in the season we got Josh Baldwin, the White Blaster Beetleborg, but this character only appeared in a handful of episodes in his Japanese counterpart, so they decided to have him lose his powers. It's too bad they didn't just find a way to keep him around or involve him in every 5th episode or something. He was really awesome. One location predominant in the show is the comic book shop owned by Aaron and Abby Williams, who is Roland's parents. Roland's grandma Nano is there. Yes, she is played by Vivian Smallwood, the rapping granny. There is a girl who works at the store named Heather, which is Drew's love interest, sort of like Zach and Angela in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, only Drew is not as smooth as Zach. Like Bulk and Skull, they wanted some comic relief bully characters. Trip and Van were 2 wealthy, annoying brats who were always trying to cause trouble. These characters, along with their chauffeur Dudley, were dropped after season 1, and there was a really good reason for that. The monsters of Hillhurst Mansion were honestly hilarious. For most people just glancing at the show, I'm sure it's easy to think it's just cheesy kids humor, but honestly, in a world that once had long-running shows like The Munsters and Addams Family, it really did pull through as a well-casted group of comedians. Of course, you have your typical Mummy, Frankenstein, Count Dracula, Werewolf, and Ghoul ripoffs. Those characters are all played by fantastic actors and are done really well. The monsters were so popular, in fact, that there was discussion of having their own spin-off series. With that sort of popularity, Van and Trip were a waste of time that could be used for the monsters. But the most unique and mentor-like monster is Flabber. I've heard Flabber described with a bunch of different celebrities. The one everyone compares him to is Jay Leno. It's a pretty obvious comparison. It looks like Jay Leno's face if it was a ghost from the Casper movie in the 90s. You have to realize that Jay Leno was an extremely famous stand-up comedian at this time, and at this point, he was hosting The Tonight Show for 4 years. At that time, only 2 late-night shows were on the air, and he was the show, so it's definitely based on him. I'm going to get a little defensive about this because I've seen some videos and some claims that the producers of the show based him on Elvis. Sure, he throws in an Elvis line here and there, but it's more of an impression than his personality, and his wardrobe definitely resembles Liberace more than Elvis. Okay, I'll let that go, but he's Liberace, all right? He's not Elvis. Anyway, kind of like the genie in Aladdin, the kids release Flabber from an organ and he grants them a wish. They wish to be Beetleborgs from their favorite comic. This is what brings the villains of the comic to life. In season 1, the monsters were called Magnivores. This released Vexor, the leader, Typhus, the Goldar type character, Noxic is sort of the Finster character. He can control machinery but is a lousy follower, and Jara is the squat kind of character, which is played by Raja, who played the White Alien Ranger. And then their putty patrollers are called Scabs, which are barely used in the series. Honestly, these villains are pretty bad. It would make sense why 3 kids can take on these villains, because they don't work together and they don't really make good plans. Our heroes did finally meet their match when Vexor created an evil Beetleborg named Shadowborg, which of course is the same suit that makes up General Vengex, who was voiced by Archie Kao. When he stole their power, they went to the Beetleborgs author and artist Art Fortune. He created the White Beetleborg, and they get their powers back and defeat Shadowborg. Towards the end of Season 1, the Magnivores steal a drawing of a villain found in Art Fortune's vault. Vexor brings the drawing to life. This was Nukus, who is so evil he disposes of the Magnivores and takes over, with his partners. He is undoubtedly the best villain thus far, and honestly would give Lord Zed a run for his money in the intelligence department. But it's revealed he was not a creation of Beetleborgs artist Art Fortune, but a drawing from Art's criminal brother Les. Get it? Less fortune? Less fortunate? Okay. Les's monsters are called crustaceans, not Magnivores. Nukus breaks Les out of jail and starts to have Les create all sorts of monsters and weapons for him. He manages to defeat the Beetleborgs and destroy their powers. The Beetleborgs call on Art to make them new Beetleborg suits. Flabber brings them to life, and that's when we enter Beetleborgs Metallix. Eventually we get to the discovery of the Lost comic. It was the only comic collaboration by Art and Les. The group of villains drawn by Les are called Mantrons, consisting of Scorpix, Centipix, Mantix, and Hornix. Their mission was to obtain Roboborg, which was, for a lack of better terms, a Zord. We didn't really have full Zords in Beetleborgs at this point, so this was a huge arsenal upgrade, but Roboborg ultimately fell into the hands of the Beetleborgs. The heroes of the Lost comic were created by Art. These are the Astralborgs, which the Beetleborgs could call on for help. These are the rest of the suits used in Forever Red. Dragonborg, whose suit becomes Stelion, without the dragonfly attachment on the head, voiced by Scott Pagter. Fireborg's head and Lightningborg's body were combined to make Automon, and Ladyborg, who becomes Tesla, voiced by Catherine Sutherland. With the Beetleborgs, Astralborgs, and Roboborg, they defeat the Mantrons. The series ends on, sadly, sort of a cliffhanger. Les Fortune doesn't feel respected by the crustacean monsters and goes back to jail for peace and quiet. He strips them of their powers to create monsters. Nukus is now pretty powerless. Defeating the Beetleborgs is out of the question at this point. That is really where the story ends. Let's dive into the logistics of the show. VR Troopers had wrapped up its second season February 21st in 1996. Beetleborgs premiered September 7th of that year, which was 2 days before the 21st episodes of Power Rangers Zeo and the 28th episode of Masked Rider. During the course of Beetleborgs, the whole entire season of Power Rangers Turbo happened. The end of the show, on March 2nd, 1998, the Beetleborgs finale aired right before Power Rangers in Space 4th episode, Shell Shock. Ninja Turtles: The Next Mutation just had its 16th episode. Later that year, on September 12th, Saban released Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog. So it's pretty crazy to see that this show shared Saturday mornings with 3 Power Ranger seasons of the Zordon era, as well as Ninja Turtles and Masked Rider. It was a hit in the heyday of Saban's live-action shows. With Beetleborgs being such a success, when Steve Cardenas left Power Rangers, that was what inspired them to hire Blake Foster as Justin to join. Beetleborgs was that big of a hit that they integrated elements from Beetleborgs into the mothership that was Power Rangers. So yes, the shows aired at the same time, but is there any proof that they were in the same universe? In the Beetleborgs show, there are visible props from Power Rangers. Of course, you can see they just went to the prop warehouse and grabbed some stuff. You're without a doubt completely correct, but the fact that Zoom Comics has the Mask of Rita's monster Sphinx on display would show that they had some Power Ranger comics based off of the real Rangers in their universe. In Power Rangers Turbo, episode 33, Fire in the Tank, Bulk and Skull are seen reading Beetleborgs comics. This aired October 30th, 1997, and on the same day, Beetleborgs Season 2, episode 18, The Curse of the Mummy's Mummy aired. This was Beetleborgs' 71st out of 88 episodes. 3 new episodes later of the Beetleborgs, Saban released the comic book crossover of Power Rangers Turbo and Beetleborgs Metallix. Is it a shame they didn't do a live-action crossover? Yes, but the sad part was that Beetleborgs had been on the air for over 2 years before they thought to make a crossover. And it should have been live-action. They talk a lot about how ratings were challenging during Zeo and then especially during Turbo, but they didn't put a lot of effort into these very obvious team-ups. You might think the Avengers movies were the first of its kind, but the first Avengers comic was made in 1963. The first Justice League comic was made even earlier in 1960. The concept of superheroes teaming up was not a new idea, and it's the whole point of Power Rangers. It's a team of superheroes. So it really drives me crazy to think that they didn't view each character as a way to build excitement. I'd like to do another video going more in depth about the missing opportunities of Saban's live-action universe, but I'm going to talk about a specific one that pertains to Beetleborgs. The fact that Justin's character was inspired by the success of Beetleborgs would have made a great crossover episode. After Turbo was over, the rest of the Rangers went to space. They could have continued Justin's story or threw him in some great crossovers. I'm sure Blake Foster wouldn't mind the extra work. Of course, Beetleborgs ended on March 2nd, 1998, and Blake Foster's appearance in Power Rangers in Space was 6 months later. This crossover episode honestly is so easy to write, it practically writes itself. Justin and his dad are traveling for a business trip, which takes them to the town of Charterville. While his father is busy at a meeting, Justin explores the town, undoubtedly finding a pretty cool comic book store. So Justin goes into the comic book store and finds a Power Rangers Turbo comic. Justin is reminiscing while reading it, and Heather starts to ask him about the Power Rangers comic. Drew comes in jealous, and Justin and Drew get into a bit of a tough guy versus tough guy discussion. Roland and Joe break it up, and the Beetleborg kids head to the mansion. When the monsters attack the city, the Beetleborgs show up. Coming close to being defeated, Justin steps in and saves them. They can't believe that he has the courage with no powers or suit. They demorph. Justin does the whole, you guys are the Beetleborgs thing. Of course, Joe and Roland are so happy, and Drew is like, this jerk off. They bring him to the mansion. He gets to meet all the kooky characters. He tells them he used to be a Power Ranger. Man, if I just had my powers back. Man, how long is Justin's dad's meeting? It doesn't make sense, but that's why it's a great kids show. The Beetleborgs go back into action when the monster reappears. They need help, and Flabber decides to help Justin temporarily regain his powers as a Ranger. Boom! Blue Turbo Ranger comes in and fights with the Beetleborgs and saves the day. Drew and Justin find mutual respect for each other and are palling around the comic book store after the battle. Justin's dad comes in and says, Justin, let's get back to the hotel. We gotta head out early tomorrow morning. He says his goodbyes. Heather gives him a kiss on the cheek. Drew makes a big, hilarious, jealous reaction. Freeze screen, credits. Honestly, I wrote that in like 30 minutes. Imagine if they put any effort into something like that. Seriously. Episodes like that are so easy and quick to come up with. It would be some of the best rated episodes of the season, simply because it's bringing in characters from other shows. Most of the actors and actresses on these shows lived near or in LA. In the Beetleborgs case, they mostly filmed in Santa Paula, California. Now, Santa Paula is not very far from LA, an hour and 20 minutes. And when you start looking at the other popular locations that they would film Power Rangers, like Simi Valley, Valencia, Van Nuys? I don't know, man, I'm from the Midwest. It's an even shorter drive. It's also pretty well known that the Power Rangers were not paid extremely well, and they didn't have the ability to demand a large amount of money, so cameos from Power Rangers or VR Troopers actors and actresses wouldn't have cost Saban that much, probably the same amount for a day filming their normal shows. So it really shows me that they honestly just could care less about building a universe for their fans. Let's get into the theory. Being that the Lost comic, which contains most of the suits from Forever Red, was something that Les and Art did together, Les would be able to recreate these very easily, and I'm sure if there are any photos or news reports about Shadowborg, he could recreate that as well, and of course, he would be familiar with his brother's work, so he could recreate the Green Hunter Beetleborg. He could create all of these suits. Maybe a few details got left out, or put a body with the wrong head, but he could recreate that for Nukus. My theory is that Nukus made Les recreate all of these for him along with lots of other weapons. When everything fell apart, Nukus knew he had no chance to fight the Beetleborgs, so he fled and became an arms dealer, much like Broodwing and SPD. It would be logical to assume Nukus made his way to Onyx. Onyx is the same planet where Corone, dressed as Astronema, retrieved the pink Quasar Saber. This is where I believe Nukus met Prince Gasket and Prince Archerina. The Machine Empire had been destroyed, and Prince Gasket needed leaders they could rely on. Nukus no longer had the power to make them living creatures, but could muster up enough power to make the suits real. Nukus sold them the Beetleborg suits, allowing them to turn them into their new generals. Prince Gasket would supply the new generals with an army of cogs, then send them on a mission to uncover Serpentera. This was, of course, Lord Zedd's personal Zord. Serpentera was insanely powerful, but it wasn't perfect. The evil Zord used such a large amount of energy to pilot and use its weaponry that it usually couldn't last through a whole battle. The Machine Empire would be the ideal villains to take this machine and not only fix it, but most likely improve it, finally making it the world-conquering evil Zord that it was meant to be. But of course they were stopped by the Red Rangers. This would honestly be a pretty cool alternate universe to see in the comics or in a fan series. The Machine Empire winning that mission and ultimately giving the Rangers the hardest fight they had ever had at that point. Considering Nukus was never destroyed and the fact that the Beetleborgs and Turbo Rangers did cross over, you can't just say it's not important, because it is. They are both in the Saban live-action universe, and this could sort of be the logical explanation of how it came to be. I love talking about these fan theories, so if you guys like this sort of thing, I'd love to see what your ideas are and what fan theories you have. So please, subscribe, keep watching, and I'll talk to you guys later. That wasn't graceful.